You know, there is a very peculiar thing that happens when you begin to see the world a little more clearly than people around you. At first, it feels like a miracle. You notice patterns in conversations. You sense the tension in a room before a single word is spoken. You taste the falseness in a compliment that everyone else accepts as sincere. You think to yourself, so this is what it means to wake up. This is what it means to see through the game. And for a brief moment, it feels like power. But eventually, you discover that it is not power at all. It is a kind of exile, because when you begin to see the truth about yourself, about other people, about society, you also begin to see just how much of human life is built upon shared illusions. And illusions, to function properly, require agreement. They need everyone to nod along, to smile at the right time, to pretend that the costume is the body and the mask is the face. When you refuse to pretend, something breaks. Not just in you, but in the room, in the dynamic, in the relationship. And people will feel it, even if they cannot name it. They will say things like, "You think too much. You're too intense. Can't you just relax?" What they really mean is, "Can't you go back to sleep with us?" Now, imagine for a moment that you are at a party. Not a wild party, just a simple social gathering. People are laughing, telling stories they've told 100 times before. Someone says, "How are you?" and the other replies, "I'm fine," with the same mechanical ease we use to flick on a light switch. But you see it. You see the way their eyes tighten just a little when they say, "Fine." You hear the tiny quiver in the voice, the half-second pause before the word. You notice the way they grip their glass too hard, the way their shoulders sag when they think no one is looking. Most people don't notice, because they are preoccupied with their own performance. They are thinking, "Do I seem confident? Do they like me? Am I saying the right thing?" But you are not entirely inside your own mask anymore. Something in you stands half a step back, watching the whole scene as if it were happening on a stage. You can see the script. You can see who's pretending. You can see where the jokes are not funny and the marriages are not happy. And once you see, you cannot unsee. This is the first crack that appears between you and the rest of the world. Not because you want to be different, not because you enjoy feeling special, but simply because the play no longer fully convinces you. The costumes are a little too bright, the lines a little too rehearsed, the smiles a little too stiff. You are no longer hypnotized. And there is a strange pain in that. You see, most people do not actually want the truth. They want comfort. They want familiarity. They want the delicious, reassuring warmth of believing that everything is basically as it appears to be, and that the story they were handed as children will more or less hold together. You, however, have noticed the cracks in the story. You have seen the adult who preaches kindness and then bullies their children. You have seen the company that speaks of values while quietly exploiting everyone beneath them. You have seen the friend who says, "I'm happy," while their whole body radiates despair. And you thought, at first, that seeing these things would make you more connected to people, more compassionate, more real. You imagined that they would say, "Finally, someone who understands, someone who sees me." Sometimes they do, but very often they don't. Very often, what they feel is threat. Because your very presence, your very way of looking says, "I see beyond the character you're playing." Now, imagine being an actor on a stage, performing a role you have practiced all your life, and suddenly, one person in the front row stands up and looks at you, not at the costume, not at the mask, but directly at you, the real you, underneath. Do you feel gratitude? Perhaps. But more likely, you feel exposed. This is why people so often turn against those who see them clearly. Not because they are evil, but because they are afraid. Afraid that if the illusion crumbles, they will not know who they are. Afraid that if they admit the truth, their life will require changes they are not prepared to make. Afraid that if they stop pretending, they will lose the acceptance of everyone else who is pretending along with them. So what happens to you, the one who sees? Little by little, you pull back. You stop sharing quite as much. You notice the way the room goes quiet when you name the elephant standing on the coffee table. You notice the way people laugh nervously, or change the subject, or later tell others that you are negative or too serious. You thought the truth would bring closeness. Instead, it often brings distance. And so, you begin to learn a difficult art, the art of seeing without always speaking. This is one of the first ways that seeing the truth makes you lonely. The more you understand what is actually happening beneath the surface, the fewer people there are with whom you can be completely honest. Not because you don't love them, but because honesty, in the rawest sense, would break the very reality they depend upon. You begin to live a double life. Outwardly, you navigate the small talk, the polite lies, the tiny rituals of social existence. Inwardly, you are watching a completely different film. Someone says, "We're such a happy family," and everyone nods. Inside, you feel the cold distance between them, the unspoken resentments, the unhealed wounds. Someone says, "It's just the way things are," and everyone shrugs. Inside, you see generations of conditioning, fear, and conformity. And if you speak this inner vision too loudly, too often, you are punished for it. Not always with anger, sometimes with silence. Sometimes with that subtle social rejection where people stop inviting you, stop including you, stop looking you in the eye. They do not say, "You see too clearly for our comfort." They say things like, "You've changed," or "You're distant," or "We just don't vibe anymore." In truth, what has changed is simply this. You once agreed to the illusion, now you do not. But let us be very clear about something. Seeing the truth does not mean that you are superior. That is another trap. Many people who glimpse beyond the surface fall into a very seductive fantasy. I am awake, they are asleep. I am deep, they are shallow. I am special, they are sheep. This is not awakening. This is ego finding a new costume to wear. Because if you really see clearly, you do not merely see the illusions of others, you also see your own. You see the subtle conceit in believing that you are somehow more real than anyone else. You see that your very identity, as the one who sees, is itself a role, a mask, a pose. And here is another secret. Even the people you consider asleep are, in their own way, seeing something you are not. They are carrying burdens you do not understand. They are living stories you have not read. Their blindness in one area is often the price they pay for survival in another. So the loneliness that comes with seeing the truth is not the loneliness of being superior. It is the loneliness of being unable to fully return to the world you once shared unquestioningly with other people. It is the loneliness of the traveler who has gone beyond the village, seen the mountains, and then come back, only to find that no one else wants to hear about the journey. Not really. Not in a way that would change their lives. They might want a story, a little entertainment, but not transformation. And transformation is what the truth demands. Think for a moment about your own life. There was likely a time when you tried to explain to someone what you were seeing. Maybe you told a family member that the way they speak is hurtful, and you could feel the unresolved pain beneath their behavior. Maybe you told a friend that their relationship was abusive, even though they kept insisting it was fine. Maybe you pointed out a hypocrisy in your workplace or your community. What happened? Did they fall to their knees and say, "Thank you for liberating me from my illusions"? Very rarely. More often, they felt attacked, because that is how truth feels when we are not ready for it. Like an accusation, not a revelation. And so, you learn to keep more of your insights to yourself. You smile and nod when people insist on stories you know are false. You offer gentle hints instead of sharp clarity. You test the waters before saying what you really see, and most of the time, you decide it is better to remain silent. From the outside, it may look as if you are simply quiet or introverted. Inside, you are carrying entire landscapes of perception that you rarely show to anyone. Now, this may sound rather bleak, but the loneliness of seeing the truth also has a very strange companion: freedom. When you see that most of what people call reality is a kind of collective agreement, a shared dream about who we are, what matters, what is allowed, then you also see that it is not absolute. You are not as bound by it as you once believed. If you can see that the social game is just a game, then you need not feel like a failure if you don't play it very well. If you can see that many of the values you were taught are arbitrary, you are free to discover your own. If you can see that much of what people defend so fiercely is simply their fear wearing a costume of certainty, then you are free not to be ruled entirely by your own fear. This is the paradox. The clearer your vision, the more alone you may feel in the human world. And yet, the closer you come to something that is not dependent on human approval at all, you begin to sense a deeper ground beneath all the performances. A kind of spaciousness that is not threatened by whether people understand you, like you, or agree with you. A silence underneath the noise of opinions. And this silence at first feels like isolation. But slowly, if you stay with it, it reveals itself as something else: intimacy. Intimacy with what? With reality itself. When you are no longer entirely hypnotized by human games, you begin to notice other forms of presence. The way the trees stand, without apology. The way the sky changes, without asking permission. The way your own breath goes in and out, without needing anyone's approval. You realize that, for most of your life, you did not truly see these things. You passed by them on your way to something important, to some role, some goal, some performance. You were so busy trying to earn your place in the human theater that you forgot you were already home in the universe. So yes, seeing the truth can separate you from people, but it can also reunite you with existence. Now, before you take that as an excuse to withdraw completely and declare, "I don't need anyone," let us look at another dimension of this loneliness. Some of you listening feel lonely not just because you see what others don't, but because you feel what others don't. You walk into a room and your nervous system lights up like an antenna. You sense the sadness that no one mentions, the anger just below the surface, the quiet desperation behind the polite smile. You are what some people call an empath. And, for you, seeing the truth is not simply a mental event, it is visceral. You feel it in your body. This is exhausting, isn't it? You go to work and, by lunchtime, you are carrying emotions that are not yours. You go to a family gathering and spend the rest of the week recovering. You read the news and feel as if your heart has been dragged through broken glass. You wonder, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be like everyone else and not care so much? But nothing is wrong with you. Your sensitivity is not a defect. It is an instrument. The problem is not that you feel too much. The problem is that no one taught you how to live with a nervous system that tuned in. You were given no manual for how to let feelings pass through you without clinging to them. You were never shown that it is possible to sense pain without taking responsibility for fixing all of it. So you conclude, unconsciously, if I see, I must act. If I feel, I must heal. If I notice, I must intervene. And this is where the burden becomes unbearable, because there is more suffering in the world than any one person could possibly carry. If you make it your mission to fix every broken thing you see, you will quickly drown, you will burn out. You will become resentful and bitter, secretly angry at the very people you are trying to help, because they will not change as quickly or as thoroughly as you think they should. Then, seeing the truth does not only make you lonely, it makes you tired, bone-deep tired. A kind of spiritual exhaustion in which you begin to think, if I can see all this and cannot fix it, what is the point of seeing it all? But there is a different way. a way that does not require you to turn off your perception, but to change your relationship with it. Instead of treating your awareness as a weapon to cut through people's illusions, you learn to hold it as a lamp, a soft, steady light that does not attack the darkness, but simply reveals what is there. The lamp does not force anyone to look. It does not chase people shouting, "See, see!" It simply shines. Those who are ready for that light will come closer. Those who are not will step away. And both are all right. This is one of the quiet revelations that comes when you live long enough with the loneliness of seeing the truth. You discover that you do not have to drag anyone into clarity. You are not the world's savior. You are not the manager of other people's awakenings. You are simply a point of awareness through which reality is looking at itself. When you understand this, the loneliness begins to soften. Not because crowds suddenly understand you, but because you stop demanding that they must. You begin to appreciate the few who do see, who do feel, who do understand. You recognize them not only by what they say, but by the quality of their presence. There is a gentleness there, a kind of weary kindness. You can feel that they too have looked behind the curtain and did not entirely like what they saw, but they did not let it turn them into cynics. They chose instead a strange combination of clarity and tenderness. They know that human beings are pretending, hiding, lying to themselves and each other, and still they love them. They know that most people are terrified of their own depths, and still they are patient. When two such people meet, two who see, two who feel, there is often an immediate recognition. The loneliness cracks a little. You look into their eyes and think, "Ah, there you are. Someone else who left the village and returned." You may never meet many of them, but you do not need many. A few is enough. You see, the goal of seeing the truth is not to become popular. It is not to gather a following or to be admired as wise. It is simply to live in alignment with what you know, as gently and honestly as you can, without hating those who don't know yet, and without hating yourself for knowing. So, why does seeing the truth make you lonely? Because truth, by its very nature, does not belong to the crowd. It begins in the individual, in those quiet moments when you can no longer pretend that the story you were given is sufficient. It begins when you stop laughing at jokes that are cruel. When you stop agreeing with beliefs you have never really examined. When you stop performing a version of yourself just to remain acceptable. The moment you do that, a distance opens. Not necessarily a physical distance, but a psychological one. You are no longer entirely inside the hive mind. And that is lonely. But it is also the beginning of real relationship. Because only when you stand somewhat apart from the collective story can you begin to ask, who am I, really, when I'm not busy playing a role for others? What do I actually value, beneath what I was taught to value? What is true for me, even if no one else agrees? Those questions cannot be asked, and certainly cannot be answered without a period of solitude. Not just being alone in a room, but being alone in your perception, knowing things you cannot yet tell anyone, seeing things you cannot yet describe. This is the desert through which every awakening person must walk. But remember, deserts are not empty. They only appear empty because they are quiet. In that quiet, if you listen long enough, you will begin to hear something. Not the chatter of society, not the echoes of other people's expectations, something deeper. A subtle intuition, a calm knowing, a sense of being held by something larger than all the human drama. When you feel that, really feel it, you realize that you are not truly alone. You are simply no longer crowded. And that is a very different thing. There is a strange kind of loneliness that belongs only to those who feel too much. Not the loneliness of absence, but the loneliness of overflow. It is the isolation that comes when your heart becomes a mirror for everything around you. You walk into a room, and without a word, you can feel who is carrying grief, who is pretending to be happy, who is quietly breaking inside. You do not intend to notice these things, they simply announce themselves to you. The room speaks, even when everyone is silent. And so, you begin to live with a constant background noise of emotion that is not yours. You pick up the static of other people's minds. Their anxiety, their fear, their disappointment. You feel them as if they were your own. At first, you think this is compassion, that to be good is to suffer with everyone. You say yes to every story, every crisis, every tear, because somewhere in you there is a deep conviction. If I can feel their pain, I can ease it. But you soon realize something heartbreaking. Pain is contagious, but healing is not. You can catch someone's sadness without curing it. You can drown in their storm without calming the sea. This is the cruel paradox of empathy. What makes you capable of love also makes you susceptible to despair. You feel so deeply that you forget which emotions are yours and which belong to the world. You become like a musician who never stops hearing music, even in silence. And after a while, that music becomes noise. When this happens, you begin to crave stillness. Not because you hate people, but because you cannot bear to absorb them anymore. You withdraw, you cancel plans, you walk alone at dusk. You sit by rivers or in dark rooms, just to remember what your own heartbeat sounds like. And yet society does not understand this kind of solitude. They call it antisocial. They call it distant. They call it strange. But in truth, solitude is not rejection, it is recovery. It is the place where your system resets, where you release what is not yours and reclaim the edges of your being. You see, most people move through life with thick walls around their emotions. They call it normal. You, however, were born with the walls missing. You were born porous. You feel everything. And in a world where numbness is considered sanity, sensitivity becomes rebellion. But what if your sensitivity was not meant to be a curse? What if it was your way of perceiving life in high resolution, too detailed for the hurried eyes of this age? Because there is a beauty hidden inside this ache. The same sensitivity that makes you tremble at cruelty also allows you to weep at sunsets, to feel music as if it were your own pulse, to find meaning in a single gesture, a single sigh. You see, loneliness is not always the absence of connection. Sometimes it is the absence of resonance. You are surrounded by people, yet none of them seem to vibrate at your frequency. You speak truth, and they laugh politely, not because they mock you, but because they do not understand the language. And that is what it feels like, doesn't it? To be fluent in a tongue no one else remembers. To say, I feel everything, in a world that only celebrates those who feel nothing. So, you learn to speak less. You hide your insight behind quiet eyes. You smile gently when people mistake your calm for indifference. Because what could you possibly explain? That you are exhausted from pretending not to see? That you are tired of watching people walk into the same walls and call it fate? That your silence is not coldness, but mercy? It takes years to understand that seeing too much is not about eyesight, it's about depth. Most people look horizontally. They see surfaces, roles, appearances. You look vertically, through layers of motives, wounds, defenses. You see the child inside the adult, the lie beneath the smile, the fear beneath the anger. And it is heavy, this kind of seeing, because it means that every argument is not really about what is being said. Every act of cruelty is not pure malice, but confusion. Every mask hides someone who once wanted to be loved and didn't know how. And if you are not careful, your compassion can turn into sorrow. You begin to feel responsible for every lost soul. You begin to believe it is your job to guide, to fix, to heal. But the universe never asked that of you. It only asked you to see, not to save. This is one of the great misunderstandings of awakening. People think enlightenment will make them feel good. But awakening does not promise comfort, it promises clarity. And clarity is not always pleasant. When you are awake in a sleeping world, your very existence becomes a challenge to others. Your presence disturbs their dreams, and your refusal to lie makes them uncomfortable. You will lose people. You will lose versions of yourself. You will lose the belonging that comes from pretending. But you will gain something quieter and far more enduring: peace. Peace does not always look like happiness. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone in your kitchen at midnight, no phone, no noise, and feeling no need to be anywhere else. It looks like forgiving people who never apologized, not because they deserve it, but because you no longer want to carry the weight of their unconsciousness. It looks like realizing that you don't need everyone to understand you, you just need to stop betraying what you understand. And once that happens, loneliness begins to shift. It does not vanish, but it changes flavor. It turns from the ache of separation into the stillness of presence. You begin to feel something sacred in your aloneness. You start to see that solitude is not a punishment, but a passage. A sacred space where illusions die and authenticity is born. But here is where most people falter. When they first see through the lies of the world, they mistake disillusionment for despair. They believe that because the dream is false, nothing is real. But the truth is quite the opposite. Disillusionment is not the death of meaning, it is the birth of it. It is the moment you stop living in someone else's story and begin to write your own. The loneliness you feel is the sound of your soul stretching its wings. It is the echo of a truth that has outgrown its cage. Yes, it hurts. It hurts to see clearly in a world addicted to fog. It hurts to be honest in a world built on pretense. It hurts to feel everything in a culture that glorifies numbness. But remember, pain is what consciousness feels when it expands. And the fact that you can feel it means you are alive to something most people only dream about. The task, then, is not to escape the loneliness of seeing the truth, but to let it mature. Loneliness, when ripened by awareness, becomes solitude. Solitude, when ripened by love, becomes communion. And communion, when ripened by silence, becomes freedom. So do not rush to fill the emptiness. Do not scramble for noise or validation. Sit in the quiet until it reveals its secret. That the very emptiness you fear is the space where truth breathes. The world may never understand what it costs to see clearly. But you were not born to be understood. You were born to remember. To remember what it feels like to be fully awake. To remember that truth and love are not opposites, but twins. To remember that the light you carry is not meant to blind the world, but to illuminate your own path through it. And once you remember that, the loneliness loses its edge. You stop yearning for crowds that cannot meet your eyes. You stop resenting the world for sleeping. Instead, you walk softly, a silent witness to the dream. You smile at those still wandering in the fog, knowing you were once one of them. And perhaps, in that gentle presence, someone will feel seen. Not exposed, not judged, just seen. And maybe, for a moment, they will wake too. When you begin to live with awareness long enough, you realize something profound. There is a difference between feeling the world and carrying the world. Most sensitive souls confuse the two. They feel the collective pain of humanity, and they believe it is their responsibility to hold it all, to transmute, to heal, to fix, to forgive. They try to be the emotional immune system of everyone they love. But that is not awareness, that is identification. And identification is the seed of suffering. To see clearly does not mean to absorb everything. It means to witness without drowning. It means to let life move through you without clinging to its waves. Imagine the sky trying to hold the wind, impossible. The wind passes, the sky remains. You too are meant to be the sky, not the storm. You cannot heal the world by collapsing under its weight. You heal it by staying spacious enough for its noise to dissolve into silence. This is what maturity of perception feels like. You still feel everything, but you no longer mistake it for yourself. You still notice the pain of others, but you no longer confuse empathy with ownership. When someone around you is angry, you see the anger rise like smoke, but you no longer build your home inside it. When someone is afraid, you recognize fear's tremor in your own body, but you let it pass through. Like thunder, it rumbles, but does not destroy. You begin to understand that compassion is not the same as merging. Compassion has boundaries. It says, I see your suffering, but I will not amplify it by making it my own. It says, I can love you deeply, but I cannot walk your path for you. This realization is the beginning of peace. And yet, reaching it feels like a kind of death. Because for most of your life, you equated love with rescue. You thought that to love someone meant to lose yourself inside them. You thought that if you could just understand their wounds, you could heal them. But now you begin to see, you cannot heal anyone who is still devoted to their pain. You cannot awaken anyone who still loves their dream. And so, you learn to stand in the fire of their suffering without running toward it, without trying to smother it. You let the pain burn until it becomes light. You allow the transformation to happen in its own rhythm. You stop being the savior and become the witness. It takes courage to do this, because the world will call you cold. They will say, you've changed, you've become detached. They do not understand that detachment is not indifference, it is clarity. It is the refusal to participate in unnecessary suffering. When you stop feeding chaos with your energy, chaos calls you cruel. When you stop agreeing to the illusion, illusion calls you arrogant. But in truth, you have simply stopped confusing pity with love. Real love does not say, let me suffer with you. Real love says, I will stand beside you until you remember your own strength. That is what awareness does. It stops adding weight to the world's sadness. It becomes a still point in the middle of the storm. And sometimes, just standing there quietly, peacefully, is enough to calm everything around you. But you will not see this immediately. At first, it will feel like rejection. You will feel guilty for saying no. You will feel like a traitor for setting boundaries. You will look at people breaking and think, if I were truly compassionate, I would help. And maybe you will help, but you will learn that help given without inner stability only multiplies the confusion. True help never comes from guilt. It comes from alignment, from being so rooted in your own center that your presence alone becomes medicine. Because the awakened heart heals not by doing, but by being. It radiates coherence. It transmits peace through stillness. It listens so deeply that people begin to hear themselves. And yet, you cannot reach that state if you keep sacrificing yourself on the altar of other people's dramas. You cannot be a lighthouse if you insist on jumping into every shipwreck. The purpose of the lighthouse is not to rescue the sailors. It is to remain steady so they remember where the shore is. And that is your task too. To remain steady. To remain luminous. To remain rooted in truth even when the waves of emotion crash around you. At some point, this steadiness begins to change the flavor of your loneliness. What once felt like exile, now feels like sanctuary. The solitude that once burned begins to cool. You realize that your aloneness is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. You are alone because you no longer belong to the noise. You have tuned your instrument to a different key. And though fewer people can play with you now, the music that emerges is purer, truer, infinitely more beautiful. And every once in a while, you will meet another being who plays in that same frequency. You will recognize them instantly. Their eyes will have the same quiet depth, the same kind of knowing. You won't need many words. A glance will be enough. That is how souls recognize each other, not through ideas, but through presence. For a few moments, the loneliness dissolves. You feel seen, understood, mirrored, and you realize something precious. You were never truly alone. You were simply waiting for resonance. The mind thinks of belonging as numbers. How many friends do I have? How many people understand me? But the heart knows that belonging is about frequency, not quantity. One person who truly sees you is worth more than 1,000 who merely look. And even when you do not have that one person, you begin to sense that life itself sees you. The sky, the trees, the wind, the rhythm of the rain, they all seem to nod back at you as if to say, "Yes, we understand." This is the mystical turn of loneliness, when the absence of human company opens you to a larger communion with existence itself. You realize that the loneliness you feared was actually a doorway. Behind it lives something vast, silent, and benevolent. Call it God, call it consciousness, call it being, it does not matter. What matters is that it knows you. It knows your ache. It knows the nights you stayed awake trying to make sense of it all. It knows the questions that have no answers. And instead of solving them, it holds you in a wordless embrace. That is when loneliness begins to turn into devotion. You stop trying to fill the emptiness. You begin to love the emptiness itself, because now you can feel what it really is, not a void, but a womb. From that silence, new understanding is born. From that solitude, a new capacity for love emerges, a love that is no longer dependent on agreement, reciprocity, or recognition. You begin to love without demand, to listen without agenda, to serve without expectation. And you realize that seeing the truth was never meant to isolate you forever. It was meant to refine you, to strip away the illusions that kept you seeking love where love could not exist. It was meant to teach you the sacred rhythm of engagement and retreat, to step into the world with open eyes, and then step back into silence to remember who you are. You start to live like the tide advancing, retreating, breathing with the whole. You no longer divide the world into awake and asleep. You stop labeling people as conscious or unconscious, because you see now that everyone is moving toward the same realization, just at different speeds. The ones who seem asleep are simply dreaming slower. The ones who seem awake are simply dreaming faster. And that realization softens you. You forgive the world for being as it is. You forgive yourself for wanting it to change. The loneliness that once felt like punishment becomes participation, a quiet companionship with everything. You belong not to people, but to the pulse of existence itself. That is the secret. You were never meant to belong to the crowd. You were meant to belong to the cosmos. You are not separate from the world, you are its awareness, looking back at itself. The trees breathe your breath, the rivers echo your blood, the stars remember your light. Everything you longed for in others was always a reflection of what already lived within you. And the more you rest in that knowing, the lighter you become. You no longer carry the sorrow of the world. You let it pass through you like wind through an open field. You still care, but your caring is no longer exhausting, it is effortless. You help when moved, not out of guilt, but out of joy. You speak when truth ripples through you naturally, not out of obligation. You love without needing to possess. And that, my friend, is when loneliness becomes solitude, and solitude becomes serenity. The same truth that once separated you from the world now connects you to it in a new way. You are no longer blind with others, nor angry at their blindness. You are simply awake, and that is enough. There comes a moment in every awakening when you begin to understand that awareness, by itself, is not enough. To see clearly, is one thing. To live clearly, that is another art entirely. Because awareness, without grounding, can turn into agony. You can see the mechanisms of illusion so sharply that they cut into you. You can watch people destroy themselves while calling it love, and it breaks your heart 1,000 times. You can see manipulation hiding beneath smiles, fear hiding beneath ambition, emptiness dressed up as success, and you feel powerless to change it. The pain is not in the seeing. The pain is in not knowing where to put what you see. And so, the next lesson begins. How to remain awake without turning bitter. How to stay open without bleeding out. How to be in the world but not swallowed by it. This is the art of boundaries, not as walls, but as membranes. Because true boundaries are not about separation, they are about circulation. They allow love to flow in and out without contamination. They allow compassion to touch suffering without becoming infected by it. Most people think of awakening as expansion, the dissolving of all barriers. But expansion without containment is chaos. Just as water needs a cup to be useful, awareness needs form to express itself wisely. So, you begin to learn to hold your awareness within a vessel, your own being. You begin to understand that not every truth needs to be spoken, not every feeling needs to be acted upon, not every insight needs to be shared. Some truths are sacred because they are silent. Some awareness is meant to be carried privately, like a candle cupped in the hands, protected from the winds of the world. At first, this feels restrictive. You think, but isn't honesty the highest virtue? Shouldn't I always say what I see? No. Because truth, delivered without context, is not liberation, it is violence. You can be right and still cause harm. You can speak the truth and still be cruel. This is what most seekers misunderstand. They discover the power of insight, but they have not yet learned the discipline of compassion. They wield their awareness like a sword when it was meant to be a bridge. And that is why awakening requires humility. It is not enough to see, you must learn to see with love. Love does not deny what is false, it simply refuses to make war on it. Love reveals illusion the way the sun reveals mist, gently, patiently, without argument. If you can remember that, your truth will never isolate you again. Because here's the paradox. What isolates you is not the seeing, but the stance you take once you've seen. When you think, I am the one who knows, you separate yourself. When you think, I am the one who sees, you close the circle around your own awareness. But when you realize, I am simply the space in which all of this is seen, then even your loneliness becomes part of the dance. You stop being the observer standing apart from the crowd and become the field in which both the crowd and the observer appear. You are no longer trying to protect your sensitivity. You are sensitivity itself, vast enough to include everything without being wounded by it. And yet, you must live among people. You must pay bills, raise children, answer messages, show up at work. You cannot live perpetually on the mountaintop of detachment. So how do you carry awareness through the marketplace without losing your balance? You begin by treating every encounter as practice. When someone insults you, you notice the sting and you breathe. You feel the fire rise in the body, but you no longer identify with it. You watch anger arise, peak, and fade. And in that watching, something miraculous happens. You discover that the part of you that observes the anger is untouched by it. This is how awareness becomes strength, not by suppressing emotion, but by seeing through it. You begin to see that the world's chaos is not here to torment you, it is here to train you. Every misunderstanding, every disappointment, every betrayal, all of them are opportunities to deepen your stability in truth. You thought enlightenment would take you away from pain. But enlightenment does not take you away from life, it takes you deeper into it without drowning. You begin to realize that spiritual maturity is not about floating above human experience, but about diving into it fully and returning with pearls. It is about letting your heart break open again and again until nothing remains but openness itself. When people hurt you, you do not close, you breathe. When the world disappoints you, you do not retreat, you observe. When you feel alone, you do not panic, you listen. Because now you know that truth is not fragile. It does not need to be defended. It simply waits beneath the noise for you to return. There is a phrase in Zen, "The 10,000 things arise together, and I watch their return." It means that every form, every story, every emotion comes and goes, but you remain as the awareness that holds them all. Once you understand this, you stop chasing peace. You realize that peace is not the absence of disturbance, it is the spaciousness that can hold disturbance. It is not a still pond untouched by wind, it is the ocean vast enough for waves to exist without complaint. And this realization changes how you relate to others. You no longer see people as threats to your serenity. You see them as mirrors, showing you where your awareness is still partial. The difficult person is not your enemy, they are your curriculum. The chaotic environment is not punishment, it is practice. The misunderstanding is not failure, it is feedback. You start to understand that every interaction, pleasant or painful, is the universe reminding you of where you still forget. And then, something astonishing happens. Your boundaries become effortless. You no longer have to force them with words or defenses. Your energy itself begins to say, "This far, no further." Your presence becomes self-defining. It radiates integrity. And that integrity naturally filters what comes in and what goes out. People who drain you start drifting away, not because you pushed them, but because your frequency no longer feeds their patterns. People who nourish you start appearing as if summoned by resonance. Boundaries, when aligned with awareness, do not imprison, they organize. They turn your life into an ecosystem instead of a battlefield. And inside that ecosystem, love can finally grow without distortion. Love, when purified by awareness, is not sentimental. It is not the desperate grasping that says, "I need you to make me whole." It is the quiet understanding that says, "I see you as you are, and you are free." This kind of love does not exhaust you, it restores you. It does not demand constant giving, it breathes naturally. It is not an effort, it is an atmosphere. When you love this way, even loneliness changes texture. It becomes a companion instead of a wound. You start to feel the still presence of something invisible walking beside you. Call it spirit, call it truth, call it life itself. You find yourself speaking less and listening more. You find yourself caring less about opinions and more about authenticity. You find yourself moving slower, feeling more, reacting less. And as you slow down, you notice the divine intelligence woven into everything. You see that even the smallest details of existence are alive with awareness. The way a leaf trembles in the wind, the way sunlight hits a wall, the way your breath forms a small cloud on a cold morning, all of it becomes sacred. This is what it means to live with an open heart and clear boundaries. You are no longer trying to fix the world. You are participating in it consciously. And participation is enough. You do not need to preach awareness, you become it. You do not need to convince anyone, your peace does the speaking. You do not need to escape life, you inhabit it completely, and in doing so, transcend it. At this point, the loneliness of seeing the truth begins to feel less like isolation and more like intimacy. Intimacy with everything that is. Because when you stop needing others to mirror your clarity, you begin to see clarity shining everywhere, in a stranger's smile, in a child's laughter, even in silence itself. You begin to notice that the world was never as asleep as you thought it was, simply dreaming at different depths. And then, another paradox reveals itself. The moment you no longer need to belong, you begin to belong everywhere. You belong to the wind, to the rivers, to the laughter of strangers, to the stillness of dawn. You belong to this vast unfolding that no one truly controls but everyone participates in. Your heart, once burdened by sensitivity, becomes an instrument of attunement. You no longer resist the song of existence, you play along. And the more you play, the more you realize truth was never meant to make you lonely. It was meant to make you real. And being real, in a world of masks, will always feel like solitude until you meet others who have removed theirs too. But whether they appear or not, your task remains the same. To live so honestly, so tenderly, so fully awake, that your very presence becomes a sanctuary for those still finding their way. That is how the awakened one serves the world. Not by shouting, but by shining. Not by rescuing, but by remembering. Not by teaching, but by being. And when you live like that, loneliness is no longer a burden. It becomes the quiet fragrance of freedom. There comes a time in this journey when the loneliness that once felt like exile begins to feel like immersion. You realize that the distance between you and the world was never real. It was only a pause, a breath between seeing and belonging again in a different way. At first, awareness separates. You see the play for what it is, the masks, the performances, the endless pretending, and you step back, unable to participate as before. But then, something unexpected happens. You begin to see not just the illusion, you begin to see through it. You start to perceive the living intelligence shining beneath every form, even the most absurd, even the most broken. You see that the same consciousness that awakens in you is the same that dreams in others. The same light that burns in your insight flickers in the eyes of strangers, even those still trapped in their stories. And suddenly, the world you thought you had left behind becomes holy. You walk through a crowded street, and for the first time, you do not feel out of place. Because you see that there is no place to be out of. Everything is you, appearing in countless disguises. The man yelling into his phone, the mother soothing her child, the old woman staring at pigeons. Each one is a wave rising and falling in the same ocean that breathes through you. You used to call this realization oneness. But words like that are too small now. Because oneness is not an idea, it is a rhythm. It is the quiet pulse behind every heartbeat, the silent hum that weaves all opposites together. And when you feel that rhythm, truly feel it, loneliness dissolves like salt in water. You realize that what you called loneliness was never the absence of others, it was the absence of recognition. You were surrounded by the divine all along. You just hadn't recognized its face beneath the masks. And so, life begins to look different. The same faces, the same streets, the same routines, but the texture has changed. Everything seems to breathe, to shimmer with invisible significance. Even pain begins to feel sacred. You no longer divide experience into good and bad, high and low. You begin to see that every emotion is a color on the same palette, and consciousness is painting with all of them. You realize that the divine does not avoid darkness, it includes it. It is not only in the temple or in meditation halls, it is in the marketplace, the hospital, the prison cell. It is in the arguments, the tears, the laughter, the silence. This understanding changes your prayer. You stop asking life to be different. You start saying, "Let me see you in everything." And you do. You see God not as a person above, but as the pulse within. Not as a being separate from creation, but as creation itself, breathing, breaking, renewing. This is what mystics across ages have tried to describe. The moment when you stop looking for God and realize that you cannot look at God because you are looking as God. That realization does not inflate your ego, it humbles it into dust. You laugh softly, realizing how hard you once tried to find something that was never lost. You were never a seeker, you were the sought. And in that surrender, something miraculous happens. You begin to live effortlessly. The constant inner commentary, the mental noise, the self-judgment, it all begins to fade. You stop trying to improve yourself as if you were a broken project. You stop trying to fix others as if they were defective puzzles. Instead, you start participating in the unfolding of life exactly as it is, dancing when there is joy, crying when there is sorrow, laughing when there is absurdity. You stop resisting, and in that non-resistance, you discover the purest kind of freedom, the freedom to be exactly as you are, moment to moment. Because you realize that nothing real can ever be threatened. The truth of you was never your story, never your achievements or failures, never your opinions or fears. It is the quiet awareness in which all those things come and go. This awareness has no loneliness because it has no opposite. It cannot be abandoned because it is what is. It was there when you were born, it will be there when you die, and it is here now watching the rise and fall of your breath, the flicker of thought, the play of sensation. You begin to see your entire life as a meditation in motion. Every breath becomes a prayer, every step a pilgrimage. You are no longer traveling to enlightenment, you are traveling as enlightenment. And so, you walk differently now, not with the restless seeking of someone who lacks, but with the soft curiosity of someone who knows they are already home. The smallest things become immense. The sound of rain, the flicker of candlelight, the scent of bread baking, each one feels like a hymn. You no longer crave extraordinary experiences because the ordinary has become radiant. You once thought awakening would separate you from the world. Now you see that it marries you to it completely. Every soul you meet becomes a mirror of your own depth. Every challenge becomes an invitation to embody truth more fully. Every ending becomes a doorway to another form of love. And through it all, you notice a gentleness growing in you, a patience that feels ancient, a forgiveness that arises without effort. You no longer force yourself to forgive. You simply see too deeply to condemn. Because how can you judge someone for being asleep when you remember how sweet the dream once was? How can you hate the illusion when you know it is made of the same substance as truth awareness playing hide and seek with itself? This is the mystery. Once you see everything as divine, the concept of good and evil begins to dissolve. You still act with integrity, but your actions arise from understanding, not from moral superiority. You are moved by the natural intelligence of life, not by rigid ideals. You become less like a soldier defending truth, and more like a river expressing it. And in that flow, loneliness gives way to belonging, not belonging to a group, but to the whole. You no longer feel like an observer watching the world. You feel like the eyes of the world itself. The witness and the witnessed collapse into one seamless act of perception. You realize that you are not a separate wave, you are the ocean waving. And the ocean is never lonely. But even here, awareness must stay humble. Because the moment you start to think, I have arrived, life will lovingly remind you that arrival is another illusion. The unfolding never ends. Every insight is followed by another layer, every silence hides another melody. The mystery is bottomless, and that is its beauty. To live in communion with truth is not to reach a final state of perfection. It is to dance with impermanence without fear. You begin to love change itself. You see that death is not the opposite of life, but its partner, the inhale and exhale of creation. You watch things end and begin without clinging to either side. And in that acceptance, you find peace deeper than happiness. A peace that does not depend on outcome, that survives loss, that glows quietly even in grief. It is the peace of alignment, of knowing that whatever rises and falls, you are the space that holds it. When this realization ripens, your relationship with the world transforms completely. You start to see God in the eyes of the cashier, in the laughter of a child, in the tired hands of a worker. You see divinity in wrinkles, in mistakes, in imperfection. You stop dividing the world into spiritual and mundane. Every act becomes sacred when performed with presence. Washing dishes becomes meditation. Listening becomes prayer. Breathing becomes worship. And that is how communion replaces loneliness, not through effort, but through recognition. You recognize that life itself is the temple, and your awareness is the priest tending to it. Every thought is incense, every heartbeat a chant. The sacred has never been somewhere else, it has only been unseen. And when you see it, really see it, you realize that the loneliness you feared was the final veil before union. You were not losing the world, you were dissolving into it. You were not falling apart, you were falling into wholeness. That wholeness does not erase individuality, it illuminates it. You can still laugh, still cry, still make mistakes, but now it all feels held in the same vast embrace. You are no longer trying to become divine. You are allowing the divine to live as you, to taste coffee through your lips, to see sunlight through your eyes, to feel wonder through your heart. This is communion. Not an escape from humanity, but its fulfillment. When you finally stop trying to be spiritual, life itself becomes your teacher. When you stop searching for meaning, everything begins to glow with it. When you stop trying to wake others, you realize they were never truly asleep. And in that realization, the last trace of loneliness melts into laughter. Because you see that the entire journey, the suffering, the isolation, the longing, was consciousness playing with itself, pretending to be lost just for the joy of remembering. You were never apart from anything. You were simply dreaming of separation so that reunion could feel like wonder. And now, wonder is all that remains. There comes a stage in this strange dance of awakening when you begin to laugh. Not the laughter of mockery or cynicism, but the laughter of recognition, the deep, relieved laughter of someone who finally understands the absurd beauty of existence. You realize that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a song to be heard. You stop trying to decode every note and start swaying with the rhythm instead. It is the laughter of the wave that spent its whole life trying to reach the ocean, only to discover it was water all along. For a long time, you carried awakening like a heavy crown. You believed it meant you had to be solemn, composed, wise at all times. But true wisdom is playful. The enlightened mind is not stiff, it dances. It knows that perfection is a myth, and that the divine loves to hide in mistakes. Look closely, and you will see that the world is not a test, but a performance, a divine comedy in which consciousness experiments with every possible role. Sometimes you are the hero, sometimes the fool, sometimes both within the same breath. Once you understand this, you stop being afraid of falling. Because even falling is part of the choreography. Even confusion is a form of participation. This is what integration feels like. You still experience pain, but you no longer make an identity out of it. You still experience joy, but you do not cling to it. You still make mistakes, but you do not crucify yourself for them. You start to live as a verb, not a noun. Not a fixed someone trying to achieve something, but an unfolding process, a melody of being that changes with every note. And here is the beautiful paradox. The more ordinary you allow yourself to become, the more extraordinary life feels. When you stop trying to sustain the image of the awakened one, you start noticing the miraculous simplicity of being human. You realize that enlightenment was never meant to make you superior, it was meant to make you real. Reality, in all its messiness, becomes your temple. The dishes in the sink are your meditation. The traffic jam is your teacher. The awkward silence in a conversation is your Zen koan. Every irritation, every frustration, every boring task, all of it becomes sacred material. Because when awareness matures, it no longer discriminates between spiritual and mundane. Everything is the same dance of energy taking different forms. The divine is equally present in prayer and in laughter, in silence and in noise, in meditation and in mischief. You begin to understand why sages throughout history often looked like fools. They had stopped pretending that seriousness was depth. They saw that the universe at its core is playful, not in a childish way, but in a cosmic one. Think of it, galaxies spin for no reason. Waves crash endlessly, not to reach the shore, but because they can. The wind blows through trees with no agenda at all. The universe plays. And you, who once thought you had to find your purpose, suddenly see that your purpose is participation. You don't need to figure life out, you only need to experience it. This is when awakening becomes ease. You move through life lightly, aware of its illusions, but no longer burdened by them. You can look at society's games and smile, knowing they are just that, games. You can play your role sincerely, without believing it defines you. You pay your bills, attend meetings, take out the trash, but somewhere within there is laughter. A silent joy humming in your chest, whispering, "None of this is as serious as it seems." That joy doesn't mean apathy, it means freedom. Because now you can care deeply without being consumed. You can love passionately without being imprisoned. You can serve others without forgetting yourself. You start to find beauty in imperfection. The crooked smile, the messy room, the unfinished conversation, they all shine with authenticity. You realize that the divine never demanded perfection, it demanded presence. Presence is perfection. And when you live from presence, life becomes astonishingly generous. You find that what you once called coincidence begins to feel like conversation, as if the universe were responding directly to your inner state. You think of someone, and they call. You take a wrong turn, and find exactly what you didn't know you needed. You surrender a dream, and a better one arrives quietly through the back door. This is not magic, it's alignment. When your mind stops arguing with life, life stops arguing back. Everything begins to flow with a mysterious intelligence that has always been there, waiting for your resistance to soften. You start to live as cooperation rather than control. You stop forcing outcomes and begin listening to where life itself wants to go through you. And in that surrender, creativity blooms. You write, you paint, you build, you cook, not to achieve, but to express. Expression becomes your form of prayer. Even work changes meaning. It's no longer about survival or validation, it becomes service. Not servitude, but service, the joy of offering your gifts back to the source from which they came. The awakened life is not a retreat from the world, it is participation with awareness. You become like an actor who knows it's a play, but gives the performance everything anyway. You laugh fully. You cry fully. You love fully. Because now, you are not afraid to lose anything, you know that nothing real can ever be lost. Even death begins to lose its grip. You start to see it as part of the music, a rest note, not an ending. You sense that what you truly are was never born and will never die. This insight doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you tender. Because you know that every person you meet is a brief expression of eternity. They are here for just a moment, as you are, and that moment deserves reverence. So you begin to treat everything as sacred, not in a solemn way, but in a grateful one. Every encounter becomes an exchange of light. Every meal, a communion. Every goodbye, a little prayer. You live slower now. You listen more. You speak less. Because you understand that silence often says more than words ever could. You watch the mind's noise, like you would watch clouds, drifting, interesting, but not binding. You no longer chase the next insight. You rest in the simplicity of what already is. And when the mind tries to pull you back into drama, as it will, you smile. You let it play its game, but you no longer invest. You've learned that awareness doesn't need to fix thought, it just needs to see it. That seeing itself is liberation. Slowly, you begin to love the whole human experience, not despite its chaos, but because of it. The highs and lows, the laughter and tears, the loss and renewal, all of it is the texture of the divine exploring itself. You don't need to escape humanity to be divine. You need to inhabit humanity fully to reveal the divine. And when you do, loneliness becomes something almost impossible to find. Because even when you are alone, you feel surrounded by wind, by sound, by silence, by being itself. You realize that the divine never left. It was simply hiding behind your expectations. This is the simplicity you were seeking all along. To live awake in a world still dreaming, and to love it anyway. To be aware of illusion without despising it. To be conscious of suffering without drowning in it. To be human and divine at the same time, in the same breath. That is integration. That is wholeness. You no longer seek enlightenment as a destination. You see it as a verb, enlightening, a continuous unfolding. And in that unfolding, laughter returns again. You laugh at yourself for ever thinking there was a finish line. You laugh at the irony of trying to awaken, when awakening was simply what happens when you stop trying. And that laughter, quiet and timeless, echoes through eternity. The sound of God realizing it was never lost. There is a quiet moment at the end of every great journey when words begin to fade. When the desire to describe, to define, to understand, dissolves. And what remains is not an explanation, but a presence. You see, awakening is not a story of progress, it is a circle. It begins in innocence, moves through knowledge, and returns to wonder. In the beginning, you were simple because you knew little. In the end, you are simple because you see that knowing was never the point. The child says, "I don't know." The sage says, "I no longer need to know." And, in that echo, they meet. For a long time, you thought awakening was about transcending humanity. You imagined reaching some luminous state where pain could no longer touch you. But the deeper you go, the more human you become, exquisitely, tenderly human. You cry more easily now, not from sorrow, but from beauty. You feel grief and gratitude in the same breath. You watch the world with the gentleness of someone who knows how fragile it all is. You have learned that sensitivity is not weakness, it is wisdom wearing a heartbeat. It is the universe reminding itself what it feels like to care. The loneliness that once haunted you has transformed into spaciousness. You no longer crave to be understood, because you understand yourself as part of everything. You no longer need to belong anywhere, because you belong everywhere. Even silence feels full now. It hums with presence, like an invisible choir. When you sit alone, it is not emptiness that greets you, it is intimacy. You realize that awareness has always been in love with itself. The seer and the seen were never two. All separation was imagination. The world is no longer something outside you, it is an unfolding inside your own consciousness. You feel the rain not just on your skin, but in your bones. You hear the wind, not as noise, but as conversation. You watch the stars and know they are not up there, they are within. It's strange, isn't it? How the same world that once made you lonely, now makes you whole. Nothing has changed except the lens. You see that loneliness was never about the absence of others, it was about the absence of awareness. And the moment you became aware, the world came rushing back in, wearing 1,000 faces. You start to notice that everyone you meet is a reflection of a forgotten part of yourself. The angry man, the tired mother, the laughing child, all of them are you, playing different chords of the same song. And once you see that, compassion becomes your natural language. Not as an effort, but as breathing. You stop asking, "How should I love?" You realize that love is what happens when nothing blocks the view. The final stage of awakening is not transcendence, it is participation. It is to move through the marketplace, with eyes open and heart unarmored. To feel the entire chaos of humanity and still whisper, yes. Yes to confusion. Yes to imperfection. Yes to loss and laughter and longing. Yes to life, in all its fleeting brilliance. You no longer need meaning to be permanent. You no longer need certainty to rest. You have found the kind of peace that can cry. And because of that, joy returns not as ecstasy, but as ease. You stop chasing happiness. You begin to notice contentment, quietly waiting everywhere, like light at dawn. It greets you in the smell of coffee, in the sound of footsteps, in the way sunlight slips across a wooden floor. It greets you in your own breath, the one constant rhythm that has accompanied you through every illusion. You realize that the truth was never hidden, it was simply too close to notice. It was not in scriptures or philosophies, but in the immediacy of being. To be awake is not to be special. It is to be natural again. It is to stop pretending that you are anything other than what life is doing right now. The mystics call this returning to the marketplace with open hands. You walk back into the world as yourself, but lighter. You still play the roles, parent, friend, lover, creator, but you no longer mistake them for who you are. You wear them like clothes, useful, expressive, but never permanent. You see that life is not a ladder to climb, but a river to flow with. You no longer try to control its direction, you let it carry you, knowing that wherever it goes, it cannot go wrong. Because there is nowhere outside the divine. Even mistakes, even delays, even heartbreak, they all serve the same vast intelligence. You don't need to forgive the past anymore, you see it as necessary. Everything was part of the awakening, even the confusion, especially the confusion. The cracks were not flaws, they were openings. The losses were not punishments, they were invitations. The loneliness was not abandonment, it was initiation. Now you understand why it all had to happen that way. Because without the darkness, light would remain invisible. Without illusion, truth would remain unrecognized. Without the ache of separation, the sweetness of union would never be felt. This is why, in the end, you are grateful not just for the joy, but for the sorrow too. You bless it all. The mistakes, the heartbreaks, the long nights of confusion. You bow to them, knowing they were the teachers in disguise. And gratitude, when it ripens, becomes silence. You no longer need to thank life with words, you thank it by living fully. By saying yes to every moment, even the uncomfortable ones. By loving the ordinary. By being here, truly here. This is the quiet freedom of one who has stopped seeking. The freedom of being nobody in particular, yet everything at once. The freedom of laughing at yourself, forgiving everyone, and marveling that anything exists at all. You no longer carry the burden of meaning, you let meaning arise on its own. You stop asking, what is the purpose of life? Because you see that life is the purpose. And when you truly see that, when you feel it down to your very bones, something extraordinary happens. You fall in love with existence all over again. Not the romantic love that grasps, but the cosmic love that beholds. The kind that looks at a leaf and sees galaxies swirling within it. The kind that looks at suffering and whispers, this too is holy. You realize that everything, absolutely everything, is an expression of the same silence-wearing sound. And that silence is home. It is where you came from, and where you return every time you stop resisting. So you sit sometimes, in the quiet of your room, and smile. You don't know why. You just feel it, the exquisite rightness of it all. You look back at the long road of seeking, the loneliness, the confusion, the endless questions, and you laugh again. Because it was never a road, it was a spiral. Every step was a return to where you already were. And now you can finally rest. Not because everything is solved, but because nothing needs to be. You understand what the mystics meant when they said, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." It was never about escaping the ordinary. It was about realizing that the ordinary was divine all along. So you keep living. You make breakfast. You feed the cat. You listen to music. You watch the sky change colors. And through it all, awareness hums softly in the background, like a flute playing behind the noise of the world. That is the final stage of seeing, not vision, but participation. Not understanding, but intimacy. Not loneliness, but communion. You have become the space in which life happens. You are not separate from the dance. You are the dance, aware of itself. And when you forget as you will, you simply smile and begin again. Because even forgetting is part of remembering. Even blindness is part of seeing. This is the peace that cannot be lost. The truth that no philosophy can capture. The simplicity that was here from the very beginning, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to notice. And so, the story ends where it began. In the mystery of this moment, in the quiet knowing that nothing is missing, and in the gentle laughter of being awake in a world still dreaming.